dobro večer ljudi, dobrodošli na još jedan Nedeljni Stripcorner. Danas je sa nama jedan veoma specijalni gost iz daleke nam Amerike, ali pre toga ovaj video je sponzorisan od strane Wolf Comicsa, malo više o tome kasnije. Ova epizoda Nedeljnog Stripcornera je na engleskom. Za titlove na srpskom kliknite dole na malo cc dugme na desktopu, odnosno gore na to isto dugme na mobilnom telefonu i selektujte srpski prevod. So, Jason, how are you, first of all?
I'm good. Just busy working away. How about you?
I'm very good, thank you. So, for somebody who might not know who you are, even though you're a writing legend, in my opinion, can you please tell us in your own words, who are you?
I'm a guy who sits in his basement and writes comic books for a living. I've been doing that for almost 20 years at this point. Like I said, I won a Marvel Comics Talent Search contest 25 years ago. So I've been doing this full time about 20 years, and mostly for Marvel, worked exclusively for Marvel for about 15 years or so, and did some Wolverine, some Punisher, a lot of Thor, Avengers. These days I'm working for DC doing Absolute Superman. I'm working for IDW doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I've also done a lot of creator-owned books over the years, like Scalped and The Goddamned and Southern Bastards. And right now I'm doing Bug Wars for Image Comics.
Taking a look at your bibliography on Wikipedia, you basically worked on pretty much everything. And out of all of these major franchises, can you tell me which one was your favorite to work on and why?
I mean, I don't usually have an answer for that. I mean, I think, anything I do, I want that to be my favorite thing. I want to have that level of investment in the story that I'm telling. I've certainly figured out pretty quickly in my career that you don't walk around comics with just a list of your favorite characters. My career has not been spent writing the characters that were my favorite when I was a kid. It's about putting yourself in the best position to succeed. So that depends on the editors you're working with, on the artist who's doing the story, and just on the character that speaks to you at that particular moment in time, whether it was a character that I loved when I was 10 years old or not. So I always feel like the thing that's genuinely my favorite is whatever I'm working on, at this point in time. So right now that's Superman, which is a great time to be working on Superman with the movie about to come out.
Yeah, definitely.
Been doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for almost a year now, and I'm doing Uncle Scrooge for Marvel, who is a character that's been very important to me for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, those Disney characters are actually incredibly popular here in Serbia.
Cool.
So we know all about it. And speaking of which, you are amongst the, if not the most published American author here in Serbia, with the likes of the greats like Frank Miller, Stan Lee, Garth Ennis, etc. Why do you think that is? I mean, besides the obvious fact that you work with a lot of artists from the Balkan region.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is because of that. I certainly have had some of my best moments in comics, whether work for hire or creator owned, working with artists from that part of the world in particular. So yeah, I don't know. I think I would give them all the credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, your work with Gerom, Sculpt and Goddamned and everything else was incredible, as well as your work with Esad Ribic on Thor. Thor, right, to these days is my favorite, classic superhero run by far.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really proud of that whole what 6-7 year run on Thor.
Yeah.
And it was a huge thrill getting to work with Esad on that. He kind of, he launched it. He did the first big chunk of it
Yeah.
and set the bar for that, and then came back and did the very end of my run as well.
Yeah, and I have to ask, and I'm sure everybody asks you this, but I have to ask, how did you like the movie?
It was not the story as Esad and I did it, or as Russell and I did the Jane Foster story. I appreciated the focus that it put on those stories and those characters, and seeing, Gore the God Butcher toys and Jane Foster Halloween costumes and Happy Meal toys and all that kind of stuff. That was my favorite part of it. The movie was a different kind of story than what we did, but it doesn't change the printed version. The story as Esad and Russell and I came up with it is still out there, still in print, and if anything, that movie helped put more eyeballs on those comics.
Definitely, I understand. I would also like to talk a little bit more about your work, specifically on Sculpt. I think Sculpt is probably your best known work here, with Gerom and others. And I would like to know, first of all, how Sculpt came to be.
I was doing a Vietnam War book at Vertigo. That was kind of my first full comic, and pitched a crime book to Will Dennis, my editor there. He and I were both big crime genre fans, and that evolved into Sculpt. And then Gerom kind of popped up out of the blue when we were looking for an artist. He sent Will some sample pages, and I don't remember what book they were for, but I remember they had horses on them. So right away we could say, well, this guy can draw horses, so that's a plus. And then Gerom did a Sculpt sample page that was awesome, with just his, there was no, I don't think there was a script yet. It's just him kind of putting some of the backstory into a page, and we knew that this was the guy we were looking for, even before I'd ever read any of his previous works, any of his European works. We sort of stumbled into finding Gerom.
I understand. We heard many times from Gerom how it's like working with you, so I would like to hear the other side of the coin. What it's like working with Gerom.
Well, it spoils you, and that Gerom is so thoughtful and so deeply passionate about everything he does, and puts so much into his work. You really just have to get out of his way. Like I was learning how to write comics while doing Sculpt, while working with Gerom, and he and I kind of learning how to work together. But I think we figured that out pretty quickly, and I knew Gerom didn't need me to choreograph a fight scene or a shootout for him. I tried to do that in one of our first issues, to do a very peck and paw style shootout, and Gerom just drew it the way he was going to draw it, which was better than what I had come up with anyways. So I knew, well, let me just, you learn not to be too precious or particular. It's like the point of this one, it's the collaboration, and the point of the collaboration is to tell the best version of this story. And it's a story's got to speak to the artist just like it does to me. And I think I learned that from working with Gerom. So all I needed to give him was just kind of the emotional core of the scene or the moment. What are these people, what are these characters feeling? And is that different from what they're saying out loud? I didn't need to give Gerom, tons of notes on setting or what these people look like. He's got all of that somehow inside his own head, and can put it on paper in ways that are just kind of staggering. So yeah, working with Gerom, especially for me, on what was really my first big book, my first ongoing series. Working with Gerom really spoiled me for the rest of my career.
I understand. I would like to talk a little bit more about your writing process. How does it come to be from like an idea in your head to a fully printed book on paper?
It's like a process. It's just like building a house, like you do it in phases. There's no magic to it. There's no like, muse reaching down from heaven and an idea just emerges fully formed and you put that right onto paper. Like you work it and work it again and keep working it until you get it into a finely honed version. Like you can always take a rough idea and write that story, but you're going to get, basically a dish that needed to simmer on the stove for a little bit longer, right? For the flavors to really come together. So it's just sometimes it's a matter of time, of things having to like roll around in your head before they coalesce in the right ways. Sometimes it's just, a matter of phases, of building it in phases. So to me, that's like the hard work. The hardest part is that the work that mostly goes on in your head before you ever put any words on paper. By the time I'm putting words on paper in terms of like writing an actual script, the hard work should be done. That's usually the fun, easier part. You're just breaking it. You know what the story is, you know what it's about, who these characters are, what they want, what they're afraid of. You're just breaking that down into pages and images and writing dialogue. And that to me is the fun part. It's the heavy lifting is everything that you did before that, of just breaking the story and, building it piece by piece into something that has a real framework and, solid structure to it.
Yeah, I understand. I would like to now shift a little bit, gears a little bit, and talk about your recent work. Currently, the latest book done by you, published here, is Batman Off-World. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that, since to me it's a little bit of a different take on a Batman story. To me it reminds me a lot of Thor, and I would like to hear a little bit more about it from you.
Yeah, Batman Off-World was my first time writing Batman. My first real, big debut at DC Comics. I had written a Penguin one-shot years ago. Was my only previous entry in the DC universe. So this was me coming to DC for the first time in a big way and wanting to kind of pay homage to some of the key books that made me a comic book fan as a kid. And most of those books were DC Comics. I was very much a DC kid. So one of those books for me was a comic called Atari Force. It came out in like the early 80s, which was Gary Conway and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. It was very much kind of DC's Star Wars. And that was one of the first issues that I ever found on the spinner rack. So it was the first time I could pick up a book and get in on the ground floor, and I loved that comic. I think it still holds up really well. It's it's not in print anywhere because of the rights with Atari, but you can track down back issues and dollar bins at any convention. So that book imprinted on me in a huge way. And New Teen Titans was the other one, the Wolfman, Marv Wolfman, George Perez run of New Teen Titans. And so I was really thinking of kind of the Omega Man arc of Teen Titans and Atari Force combined with some of those early Batman books that made a huge impact on me, like Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. So to me, if you take all those comics and wad them up, mix them all into a gumbo, what comes out of it is Batman Off-World. So it is a story of a young, raw Batman, a guy who's kind of been on the job a year or so, he's just sort of started to get his arms around Gotham City and how he can be an effective protector for it as Batman. And then suddenly he's confronted with something, a being from off world. And for a guy who had spent so much time traveling the world and training, preparing for every possible threat he could face in Gotham, he had absolutely no experience dealing with alien threats. So he realizes that his training is not complete and he's got to go basically on walkabout in space, to be ready to protect Gotham from any and all threats that are going to come. And then along the way, the story becomes more of than just about him training. It's really him answering the question of what does it mean to be Batman? What does it mean in a setting like he finds himself in this faraway, war-torn galaxy? So yeah, it's a huge thrill, of course, to get to write Batman for the first time. A huge thrill to get to work with Doug Mahnke, who is someone I've literally wanted to work with, for like 20 years. I was always trying to get him on various Marvel projects I was doing, but he was always at DC. So eventually I was able to go to him. And so he was a perfect person to draw that book. It's a really, really gorgeous, dark and gritty, but also fun. And I think a very heartfelt story of Batman in space.
Yeah, definitely. Especially agree about the artwork. So after Batman, of course, comes Superman, the big Boy Scout. How was that different than writing Batman?
I mean, it felt more intimidating, I guess, writing Superman for the first time. I mean, the first time was I wrote 3 issues of Action Comics that came out last year. And then that was kind of right before I started on Absolute Superman. Superman, again, was a huge part of me becoming a comic book fan in the first place. When the Superman movie came out in late 70s was big for me. And then so many of the first comic books I ever read had Superman in them, whether they were issues of Superman or Action or World's Finest or DC Comics Presents. Those were the first books that drew my eye. So Superman's kind of always been, like the gateway drug for me into comic books. And I've always felt like, none of this would exist without Superman. So part of me has always felt like you're not really a true, proper comic book writer until you've written Superman. And I was happy that I was able to kind of work towards that over the course of almost 20 years before getting my chance to write Superman. I felt ready for it, but again, also nervous and intimidated. And even though I'd put words in the mouth of, every character you could think of at Marvel, doing that for Superman for the first time gave me pause. Which was also one of the reasons I was so excited about doing Absolute Superman is getting to do my own version of that character.
He's slightly more dark and gritty here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a darker and grittier world and a darker and grittier kind of story, but we're still, to me, everything that I'm doing in that book is kind of taking who that character has been over the course of, almost 100 years now, going back to, what did he mean to Siegel and Schuster? Who were they? Why did they create this character? What was at the core of that meaning? And how do you take that and how does that resonate today? What does that, how is that the same or different if that character was being created right now as opposed to 1938? It was never about coming in and let's change Superman and let's just make Superman darker and bloodier. I mean, it's a darker story, but I think that darkness is really goes back to kind of what the heart of the character was, in the 1930s, and that this was first and foremost an immigrant story by two young sons of immigrants. And doing that story in 1938, is very different than doing it in 2025. So, it became a darker story and a darker, harder, more tragic path for Kal-El to walk in order to become Superman.
I have to ask, even though we're recording this before the movie officially comes out, have you seen the new Superman movie?
I have not seen it. No, I wasn't able to make it to the premiere this week. I got to go to the set last year with a bunch of other DC comic creators, and we had a wonderful time. James Gunn showing us around, giving us a tour of the Fortress of Solitude set, and letting us watch a few scenes get shot. And so that was a wonderful experience. But no, I haven't actually seen the movie yet. I'll go see it this weekend.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait. So, shifting gears completely, let's talk a little bit about European comics. You still haven't written anything in Europe. Would you like to write something for an European publisher?
Yeah, I'd certainly be open to that. I've had a few conversations about that, but nothing we've ever been able to make happen. But I think I've worked with so many European artists over the course of my career. Feel like every time I travel abroad to a convention, whether that's in, Italy, Spain, or wherever I go, I'll meet 3 or 4 artists that I've worked with over the years. So we've just never actually met in person. And I have a lot of good relationships with, like with Panini in Italy, and Urban Comics in France, and people who've published, so many of my books over the years from Marvel and DC stuff, but also the creator-owned stuff. So, and I'm always up for an excuse to visit Europe and go to festivals over there. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see me do something original for somewhere in the European market at some point.
That would be amazing. I have a question I have to ask you. I spoke to a lot of your editors and translators here in Serbia, and each and every one of them has asked me to specifically ask you, not if, but when are you coming to Serbia?
Oh, I would love to. I mean, I've talked to Gera and Esad about that. So yeah, I would love to.
Good, but no firm answer.
No firm. I haven't agreed to any set date, but sure, if you're a convention there, reach out to me and we'll make it happen.
Awesome. What is your favorite European style, or like a comic outside of America and Japan?
What's my favorite comic from outside America and Japan?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I love the Meta Barons by Jodorowsky. So much of that, such an incredible array of artists who've worked on that. So I'd probably say that. I also love my knowledge of British comics is not super extensive. I haven't read too much Judge Dredd. I've read some of Garth Ennis's stuff, but I love Slain the Horn God is a book I really enjoy, and that I've been digging out again recently as I've been working on Bug Wars. I've just wanted to read other kind of dark fantasy, sword and sorcery stories that I've loved from over the years.
I would like to talk a little bit more about your creator-owned work. We here are very familiar with Sculpt and with The Goddamned, but we are not really familiar with anything else. What could you recommend out of your extensive library to people who are maybe not familiar with your other works?
Well, like I said, right now I'm doing Bug Wars, which is coming out through Image. We haven't finalized foreign publishing deals on that just yet, but we'll be working that out soon. But we're in terms of America, we're up to issue 5. Issue 6 comes out next month, and that'll be the end of book 1. But book 1's really just the beginning. There'll be kind of more one-shots and minis as we go, fleshing out the world. It's a really massive, intricate world, even though it's also at the same time very small, and that the story takes place in a kid's backyard in a small town in Alabama. But this backyard is home to all manner of exotic insects and various tribes of tiny little people called mites who live among the bugs. So there are ant people and beetle people and spider witches and all these different factions and kingdoms, all set within this one yard. And the yard is actually modeled specifically on the backyard I played in when I was a kid. So when I was that kid who was reading Atari Force and reading Dark Knight Returns, falling in love with storytelling and comics, this is the yard I was running around in, making up stories in my head. So it's on the one hand, a story about a kid who shrinks down and goes on a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids style adventure in a very dark and bloody Game of Thrones kind of way. But it's also a story that's very personal for me.
Give me just 1 second, please. So we're talking about this, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's the ash can that Mahmoud and I did at New York Comic Con.
Yeah, we will be giving away one of these signed by you, actually.
Cool.
Kao i uvek, i ovaj put ćemo deliti neke stripove, kao što sam već aludirao. To su stripovi koje je radio Jasonov. Imamo ih 5 komada, odnosno 5 srećnih dobitnika koji se prijave na Discord server Strip Club u sekciji Osvojite stripove. Pa šta možete dobiti? Pre svega tu je issue Bug Warsa koji je potpisao Jasonov. Onda imamo trade Unworthy Tora koji je naravno opet potpisao Jasonov. Pa onda imamo King Thor u izradi Jasonova. Onda imamo Battleworld Thors i na kraju The War of the Realms, što je najveći event Marvela u skorašnjoj istoriji koju je naravno radio Jasonov. Sve ovo je sponzorisano od strane Wolf Comicsa i zahvaljujem se još jedan put na saradnji. Moving on, I would like to know what life experience had the biggest impact on you? In terms of writing, of course.
That's a good question. I mean, I some of it I think was kind of where I grew up, growing up in a small town, growing up in the backwoods, growing up in the South. I have siblings, but they're all quite a bit older than me, so I think I grew up kind of as an only child in some sense. And just, fell in love with reading at an early age. So read voraciously of sort of all different kinds of things, whether Westerns or fantasy stories, nonfiction stuff, discovered comics, fell in love with comics, spent all my time outside, running through the woods, making up stories in my head, playing with my Star Wars figures or He-Man toys. So I think I just became a lover of stories in kind of all shapes and sizes. And I figured out pretty quickly, I liked to draw when I was a kid, and then I kind of abandoned that and started to fall in love with writing. And for me, as someone who kind of struggled, I think I've always struggled my life to kind of put my emotions into words that I can, say out loud and communicate to another human being. But I could say whatever when I was sitting down to write. So to me, that became kind of the way that I communicated to the world at large and said, this is who I am, and these are the things that are important to me. And then it just kind of became a fundamental part of who I am, you know. So I think kind of where I grew up and how I grew up had a big part of that. And I think having a mom who was very supportive of whatever I was into or whatever I wanted to do, took me to comic conventions and comic book stores and used bookstores and kind of bought me whatever stuff I was into, or took me to see whatever movies I wanted to see, and encouraged me at a time when it seemed like a very far away, unobtainable goal to write comics, because, you know, there was nobody doing that in my neck of the woods. Especially back in those days, you know, publishing was very much focused in New York, and New York to me might as well have been a million miles away. So even when that seemed like a pretty unreachable dream, you know, having a mom who encouraged me that if that was what I wanted to do, then I could do it. And eventually I did. You know, it took a while to get there, but to me, every day that I get to wake up and do this for a living, you know, it's worth all the struggle and all the work that I had to do to get here.
I understand. And I would now like to know which of your children you like the best. So what is the best artist you worked with? Or at least the most inspirational?
The most inspirational?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I have worked with an incredible, I've been incredibly fortunate to have worked with a vast array of super talented artists kind of throughout my career. But I mean, I would say that Gara easily rises to the top. And one, he's the artist that I have worked with the most of anybody over the course of my career, from Scalped and the Goddamned, and then the few other things we've done. You know, he did a Thor story for one of the issues of God of Thunder. He did the Nighthawk issue of the Heroes Reborn story that I did for Marvel. So Gara is one. He's the artist I have worked with the most. I think he's the artist that we've developed kind of the closest relationship. We had worked together for a few years before we ever met in person, and now we've hung out, you know, in different cities around the world, from New York and to Prague to Gara's home in Barcelona. And again, Gara is somebody that I think we developed kind of a working relationship that is sort of different than what I've had with most people, where we just, you know, I think we are able to connect story-wise and intent-wise in kind of a deep level with what we're doing. So yeah, I think it's easy for me to say Gara.
Okay. And given that you worked on pretty much every major franchise, is there anything you haven't worked on but you would like to work in the future?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think there's, you know, I've just started working at DC. So I've written a little Batman, just started working on Superman. Superman's something Absolute Superman's the book I hope to be on for a long, long time. I would love to come back and do more Batman, you know, Batman Off-World was super fun. I would like to do a more traditional street level Batman. And then there's tons of other DC characters that I love, or that I think I could do something interesting with. And beyond that, there's all sorts of other opportunities too. You know, I just did Thor versus Godzilla for Marvel, which was a huge thrill as a big Godzilla fan. I just wrote the first issue a couple weeks ago of a new book that'll be coming out from another company that's I'll just say it's something else that I was a big fan of from my childhood. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've you know, after being at Marvel for so long and writing so many big Marvel properties and stepping outside that for the first time, and suddenly, you know, hitting a point where I was working with 5 or 6 different companies at the same time. I feel like this is kind of a big, you know, second arc of my career where I'm getting to kind of stretch my wings and work on all different kinds of characters and stories, and it feels like that's still just getting started, you know, and I'm going to enjoy this newfound freedom that I have and ability to kind of take any phone call and pursue any sort of creative avenue I would like.
I understand. That really does sound amazing. I have one more question. Given that you said you really enjoy working with Gera, do you have any other collabs planned with him right now?
Well, we will definitely do more of the Goddamned. That'll probably be the next thing you see from us. And beyond that, yeah, I'm always up for working on with Gera, you know, whether that's us doing more of the Goddamned or more of another creator-owned book, or like I said, those times we've been able to work together at Marvel have been super fun as well. So, you know, Gera is the caliber of artist who can draw absolutely anything. No matter what book you put him on, you're going to get an incredible, you know, surprising and interesting take on it. So yeah, I'm up for working with Gera on whatever sounds interesting to us for as long as I'm in comics.
Ovoga puta u saradnji sa Aleksandrom Anđelkovićem iz Leskovca, a u čast Jason Arona, pravimo jedan special edition bookmarker. Prvi u nizu bookmarkera iz kolekcije Milancius X umetnik i prvi umetnik koji je uradio Superboja, odnosno Robina, u čast Jason Arona i njegovih najnovijih stripova u DC-u je Aleksandar Anđelković iz Leskovca. Ove bookmarkere, koji su odlično urađeni i prelepi, možete naručiti ekskluzivno na mom novom merch shopu milancius.com i cena ovih bookmarkera je, pošto su naravno limited edition, znači čim se prodaju neće se štampati više, je 300 dinara po komadu plus PTT. We have quite a few questions from the audience, so if you don't mind, I would like to switch a little bit to them.
Sure.
First and the hardest question, what is your favorite story you wrote?
Yeah, you know, again, that's a tough one to answer. I mean, you know, there are books that still feel very special. Scalped is very special because that was kind of my first big book. And I really loved those characters that Gera and I created. My entire Thor run feels very special. You know, the stuff I did with Esad, but also the Jane Foster story in particular, and that I think that story had a real fun, dynamic take on Thor, but also...
If I might add, I really loved the twist of why he became unworthy.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was always, you know, that was a big secret for a lot of years as to what did Nick Fury say to Thor. And I don't think I even told anybody. Like at the Marvel retreats, I would kind of skip over that when we'd get to that question. But I always had it written in my Thor notes. I think initially what Fury said was longer, and I just kind of boiled that down to 3 words ultimately. But I did always have that. You know, I kind of always knew. I think anytime you do a big secret like that, you need to know what it is yourself and to know, like, why is this happening? What is this really about? So yeah, those were ones that were very special. If you want to talk about specific single issues, I've had a couple of those that's special. One of them was an issue of Scalped. I want to say it was issue 35 or so. It's a completely standalone story in the midst of, you know, the 60 issues of Scalped. Is drawn by Daniel Zazelle, and it follows this old couple who live on the Prairie Rose Reservation, and you kind of just see their struggles and their love for each other. Has nothing whatsoever to do with the rest of scalped. It's just sort of this, one story plopped down in the midst of the bigger narrative. But I've always been really proud of that story. And the other one, I would say I did an issue of Wolverine and the X-Men with Mike Allred that focused on Dupe. And working with Mike was a tremendous thrill and an honor because I'm such a huge fan of his, and he was one of the most amazing collaborators. So if you're just talking about single issues, I think those would be two of my favorite ones.
Okay. Who would you say was your biggest influence as a writer and why?
I mean, I think I had a long list of influences. And I mean, in terms of comics, Alan Moore was a early influence, Frank Miller, and then Grant Morrison was really, really huge for me, kind of discovering his Vertigo work. Animal Man and Doom Patrol really blew my mind back in the day, and I've continued to be such a huge fan of Grant over the years. And Garth and his...
I recently discovered his Animal Man, and it was amazing.
Oh yeah, so great. Yeah, it's mind-blowing if you've never read it. And then Garth Ennis was another one I would put on that pedestal as well. But also, especially growing up in the South, like William Faulkner was a huge influence on me, and Elmore Leonard, especially his westerns, Cormac McCarthy, James Ellroy. There's a long list of writers that are important to me.
Okay, and what would be your favorite book of all time?
Favorite book, like comic or
no book?
Prose book, favorite of all time. I mean, I would either say Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was the first book I ever remember reading, like first book I picked up and just read on my own. I would say that, or Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is probably as an adult.
Have you read the graphic novel adaptation?
I have not. No, I have not. I saw that, but I haven't. Have you read it?
Yes, it's really amazing.
Good. Yeah, it's such a incredibly powerful book, especially as a parent. It's such a gripping, harrowing read. One of those books that you start reading it and you're probably just going to stay awake until you finish it, because it's hard to go to bed when you're leaving your characters in such a desperate place, and you just want it. Maybe if I read 10 more pages, they'll be better, and then it doesn't get better.
I can just say for the comic book that, in my eyes, the main inspiration for the characters were the Jews of Auschwitz.
So, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll have to read the comic.
Definitely. And actually, while I read it, you should probably read everything that guy has wrote up until this point.
Who is it who does the comic?
Manu Larsenet.
Cool.
Yeah. He has Blast and a few other stuff, and everything is amazing.
Cool.
So, moving on. What is your favorite author outside of comics? Well, you can answer that already.
Favorite author outside of comics?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I probably Cormac McCarthy, just overall. Like I said, I'm also always been a huge James Ellroy fan. Two writers whose, stories and prose are so very, very different from one another. Yeah, and I would say right now I'm really liking, I've started reading Joe Abercrombie's dark fantasy writer, modern writer whose stuff is really, really good.
Okay, and do you have a favorite film director?
Yeah, I mean, probably still Kubrick. There's some personal connection there. That my cousin was the Vietnam vet who wrote the book that Full Metal Jacket was based on. but also just how idiosyncratic and deeply thoughtful and kind of endlessly interesting Kubrick always was. I mean, all his movies are so very different, but to me, none of them have ever lost their power in terms of his best stuff. So I think, a director whose films I can continue to go back to again and again and again, and they continue to be interesting, and the things strike you in ways that they haven't before. But I also love William Friedkin and Paul Thomas Anderson, and a long list of directors, Peck and Paul, who we mentioned before. Yeah.
Okay, and the other side of the coin, which is your least favorite director?
Least favorite?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't like to throw shade at anybody. So I don't know that I have a least favorite director. There are movies I don't like, but I think every director alive has made a bad movie. I don't know that. I mean, Ryan Coogler hasn't, but he's also very young, and it's so most everybody else, the more I work, the little I've done kind of in Hollywood, I'm more and more I marvel at not just how does anything get made, but how does anything get made and it's good. When a film or TV show gets made and it's really, really good, there was a lot of work that went into making that. So in comics, they're similar to a lesser extent, I think, where there's a lot of factors that go into bringing that story to life, and sometimes the pieces don't all fit together in the right way for whatever reason. I think with a film, that could be a number of things. It's not all necessarily the director's fault. But the directors I revere the most are the ones who continue to take interesting swings instead of just repeating themselves over and over. And I think Coogler is a great example of that, of like a young filmmaker who's been hitting everything out of the park, and Sinners was one of my favorite movies of the last few years, and so I like the directors like that who continue to let me do something different and interesting.
Sinners was really amazing, especially the music, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, and do you have a favorite manga?
I don't have a big manga knowledge. So my touchstones with manga are all going to be older stuff. Lone Wolf and Cub was a huge book for me. I discovered that like during those original, I don't know, his first comics, I think, who reprinted it with those Frank Miller covers. But loved that whole story. Bought all the Dark Horse trade paperback collections. Loved the movies too. You got to get the nice Criterion edition of all those films. So yeah, I'd say Lone Wolf and Cub.
Okay. I've noticed that almost all of your work after Thor has a mythological-like feeling, especially in Absolute Superman. Was that on purpose?
I don't know. I mean, not consciously, I guess. I mean, I think I would say since Thor, I've written a lot of different kinds of things. Just last year alone, I wrote a lot of different kinds of things, from kind of finishing up my Punisher story to doing Batman to doing more Conan, doing Turtles, doing Uncle Scrooge for the first time. Like, it was a kind of a vast array of characters. I mean, I feel like I kind of pride myself somewhat, I guess, on just over the course of my career, I've done a lot of different kinds of things, and I think there are tropes I have and kind of characters that I'm return to again and again and again. But hopefully that feels like kind of a varied array of stories and voices, because that's kind of who I am as a consumer of media, and that's sort of what excites me and inspires me as a writer, of just doing different stuff that hopefully doesn't all read or feel or sound the same.
Okay. And what are your inspiration for your Turtles run?
Frank Miller, definitely Frank Miller. I mean, I got to have dinner with Frank earlier this year at a show in Calgary, and got to tell him, like, I'm doing Turtles right now, and it's basically like I'm doing it like, what if you had done Turtles? You know, like, so much of Frank's Daredevil was a big influence on Eastman and Laird, and so it was kind of, for me, it was sort of going back to that original series and sort of what were those dudes into and what were they riffing off of, and so trying to bring a little bit more of that old school Frank Miller grittiness to the Turtles.
Yeah, I wanted to say, wasn't like the original run of Turtles kind of like Frank Miller Turtles?
Right.
Okay. Do you have a favorite note you ever got from an artist, like a random sketch, a hilarious comment in the margin, or a moment when they improve the story without a single word?
Oh yeah, I think there's tons of moments where artists, you know, improve the story as it was in my script, or do something, go in a different direction that I had never even thought of. That's happened again and again and again, whether that was Gera or working with Chris Pachalo. You know, I started working in a different script style for Chris, to sort of give him more freedom and flexibility to design the pages and break everything down into panels. So yeah, those moments have happened again and again and again. And I don't have a ton of original art, but I've got things from mostly from books I've worked on. A lot of stuff from Gera, some pages from the books, but also just things he's drawn just to give to me. One of them's a drawing of me and him together. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that I have that's very special.
Was there ever a time you turned in a script and thought, there's no way editorial lets this fly, but they totally did?
Sure. Yeah, that's happened a few times. I mean, most recently with Absolute Superman, I've done a couple of pretty dark issues that we didn't really have any major changes to. I did a Thanos Rising miniseries years ago for Marvel that went to some really, really dark, disturbing places. So yeah, that's happened quite a few times, where I've more times, that I've gotten stuff past editorial than I've had stuff, had the kibosh put on it by editors.
Okay, and who is the most unexpected person who's ever told you they're a fan of your work?
That's a good question. I mean, I think anybody that I meet, who knows my work. Lots of wrestlers. I'm a big pro wrestling guy, so lots of wrestlers I met are comic fans. CM Punk is a big comic nerd. Brody King at AEW is a big comic fan. I guess probably the biggest one was the first time I met Grant Morrison. He knew who I was and had read Scalped and liked it, so that really blew me away.
Nice. What's one moment that genuinely floored you? Like, this is why I do this kind of moment.
I mean, I really feel like that every day. Every day I'd sit here and get to see pages coming in. Today I was looking at pages for the new Uncle Scrooge miniseries, for the next Bug Wars issue, and I just feel very lucky that I'm getting to work with such amazing crews of people, literally from all over the world. We come together to do all these different books. So yeah, I really genuinely feel like that all the time.
Amazing. Given that you have quite an extensive portfolio of work, how long does it usually take you to write like a single issue?
I mean, it can take 3 days at the shortest to a week and a half or 2 weeks at the longest. But, usually I'm aiming for a book a week is the goal. So sometimes I might, catch fire and write 2 books in 1 week. Other times I'll have an issue that I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall for a few weeks before I get it done. But book a week is the goal.
Amazing. I have a question about Star Wars. How far could you go into creating new canon? Do you have absolute freedom, or do you have to talk to lore masters at Disney from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't have any kind of absolute freedom dealing with Star Wars. I mean, there's a lot of stuff at play there, and a lot of voices in terms of getting things approved. So, yeah, there's it's a big machine at Lucasfilm, and so it's a lot to navigate in terms of, in my experience, it was in terms of getting stuff approved.
Okay, I have a question about Avengers versus X-Men, since that's literally what's coming out right now in an edition here. Your opinion about Avengers versus X-Men, and how did you and other writers from your writing team handle that storyline?
Yeah, that was a wild experience, because it was, there were 5 or 6 of us writing that book together. It was really me and Bendis going off together to sort of plot things out, which was a cool experience. That's the first time I'd ever really worked directly with Brian. Part of it we did at his house in Portland. Some of us flew out there for a kind of mini Marvel retreat at Brian's house. But really, I'd been a huge fan of Brian's for years, and I'd kind of gotten to know him a little bit at those Marvel retreats, but really loved getting the chance to work with him directly like that. And it's kind of taken with just how gracious and open a collaborator he was. And then, in terms of the overall story, there was also Jonathan Hickman and Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction, and all of us kind of trading off issues of that book, getting to work with different artists. So it was really like this wild, crazy, all-star, affair. Of us all just trying to do the biggest, craziest Marvel story that we could.
Awesome. Which piece of art influenced you the most as a writer?
Which piece of art?
Mm-hmm.
Which piece of comic art?
Sure, let's take it that way.
I mean, I don't know, probably Jack Kirby. I think I still go back to Kirby's best stuff a lot, whether that's his work on Thor or the Fourth World stuff or Commandi, the Demon. Just like the sheer amount of ideas per page that he packs into his stories, not to mention just how alive and full of action that they always feel no matter what's happening on the page. So yeah, I would say Kirby.
Awesome. I also love Kirby. I think everybody loves Kirby. Have there been any major story ideas that you had to scrap or drastically change due to editorial constraints?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that, like I said, there was stuff in Star Wars that we couldn't always do, but really, I was mostly surprised at the stuff we were able to get into the books, especially in those early days. Like with the Star Wars book, by the end of issue 1, we've got Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker face to face for the first time, and we brought in Jabba the Hutt, and we brought in Boba Fett, and figured out a way to have Luke Skywalker fight Boba Fett. So yeah, I was thrilled with all that stuff we were able to get in there. Yeah, as things went on, and there were more movies and more things in production, things got harder to navigate. but for the most part, I was able to do the book that I wanted to do.
Awesome. Are there any artists currently working that you would like to work with that you haven't worked with before?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's always a list. Frank Quitely, I think, has been at the top of my list for a long, long time. Not just because he's one of the most incredible artists alive today, but also because he's just the sweetest, nicest human being that you'll ever meet. So I think it would be a huge thrill to work with Frank on something someday. But he doesn't do a whole lot of comics these days, so don't know if that will ever happen. But he did do a cover for Absolute Superman #1, which was a huge, huge thrill.
Awesome. And what about a friend of the channel, Stevan Subic?
Sorry?
Stevan Subic, the current artist in DC that's working on Batman Full Moon and the Penguin and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, his stuff is awesome. Yes. Yeah, again, it's like, for me, it's like a long list, like literally a list I keep of artists I would love to work with. So I've been lucky to have checked some names off of it over the years. I've gone, Cliff Chiang, who I'd wanted to work with for years, drew an issue of my Turtles run. But yeah, there's tons more names on the list, people I would love to work with.
Okay, and last question from the audience. Have you ever written a story that you like that will likely never get made? And is there a story that you would like to write but no, will never get made?
A comic I would like to write that I know will never get made?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I wouldn't, if there's something I wanted to do in a story I feel like I want to tell, I don't think I would accept that it's never gonna happen. If it's a Spider-Man story, then maybe it's something that doesn't work for Spider-Man, but something I could do somewhere else. But so no, I don't feel like that. Of anything, of the ideas I've got penciled out, that I would like to do down the road a bit, I'm not going to accept that any of them, can't come to life.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. Those are all of the audience questions. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to share with us?
I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything.
Well, thank you again for your time. It's been truly amazing meeting one of your comic book heroes for me. And I really, really appreciate you coming on the show, and thank you again.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you guys. Bye bye. Ovaj video je sponzorisan od strane Wolf Comicsa, vašeg omiljenog dobavljača stripova na engleskom jeziku. Za sve vaše potrebe možete ih kontaktirati na Facebooku, a ono glavno što nude su sva moguće izdanja na engleskom jeziku, koja su stvarno besprekorno spakovana, znači mogu preživjeti svako bacanje od strane poštara i tako dalje. Nude bukvalno sve nove i stare naslove, kao i povoljne cene i niske troškove isporuke. U principu šalju poštom, tako da plaćate samo CC paket. I naravno, na sve poruke koje su im poslate će odgovoriti u najkraćem mogućem roku. Još jedan put Wolf Comics na Facebooku.